Tom, I just came back from Navy and I got the answer that I was kind of expecting, which is no comment. And there's a reason for that, is because the Navy never divulges the location of their submarines unless they are tasked to do it in order to send a message. Now,
at 2:17 a.m., deep beneath the still waters of the North Atlantic, something unexpected erupted on the sonar screens of the USS Gerald R carrier strike group. Without a single alarm sounding, sonar operators froze. An unmistakable echo appeared directly beneath the flat tops formation, precise and disciplined, not random noise. It was a submarine, but not just any contact. This vessel held depth and speed with uncanny perfection, as if it wanted to be detected. There was no confusion. Within seconds, naval intelligence confirmed what every operator feared and yet expected. The blip was a Russian attack submarine, stalking the American carrier from below. In total silence, it tailed the strike group, closing to a dangerous proximity. This was not reconnaissance by accident, nor a glitch in the system. It was a deliberate challenge, an audacious test of detection, nerves, and control. The atmosphere in the Combat Information Center was tense, but disciplined. No alarms, no escalations, just an intense focus on interpreting each ping, every shift in depth, and every pattern change. This was underwater chess, at full speed, played without weapons fired, and with the world none the wiser. Before we unpack how the US responded, how technology turned the tide, and what this silent duel revealed about modern naval brinkmanship, make sure you hit subscribe to Military Power to stay locked on the true stories behind military might and strategic confrontations. In recent weeks, the tranquil blue expanse of the Atlantic and Caribbean has become a flashpoint in a silent maritime struggle. The USS Gerald R. carrier strike group, a symbol of U.S. naval dominance, was already navigating contested waters when a new layer of tension was added from below the waves. Far from routine patrols, this region has seen an unusual naval deployment linked to one of the most controversial episodes in global energy and sanctions politics. The catalyst was a series of U.S. seizures of oil tankers connected to Venezuela's sanctioned export network, including a Russian-flagged vessel pursued for weeks by U.S. forces before being boarded and taken under American control in early January 2026. Washington's effort to block these ships was part of an intensified blockade of Venezuelan oil, itself part of broader sanctions enforcement. In response, Russia reportedly dispatched a submarine and other naval vessels to escort and protect the tanker under pursuit, signaling Moscow's alarm at what it saw as aggressive enforcement of U.S. maritime policy. This was no ordinary naval escort. A submarine operating near these contested shipping routes exposed how seriously Russia viewed the unfolding situation and how high the stakes had become. For the U.S. Navy, a submarine's silent approach within range of a carrier strike group is more than a mere tactical concern. It is a political and strategic signal that challenges freedom of maneuver in a contested theater. For decades, submarines have been among the most feared tools of naval power precisely because they can influence outcomes without firing a single weapon. Their quiet presence alone can alter calculations of risk and response. But this time, the situation was different. The carrier did not change course under pressure. Instead, its escorts adjusted quietly, subtly tightening formations and deploying layered sensors. This was about more than avoiding escalation. It was a demonstration of confidence and control in the face of a multi-layered challenge, where every decision, every sensor ping, and every contact report was weighed against the calculus of both data and danger. This was the moment when every move under the sea could have far-reaching implications for geopolitics above it. The moment the sonar contact stabilized beneath the carrier group, the situation quietly crossed from routine monitoring into something far more serious. U.S. Navy sonar teams noticed that the object below the surface was making very small, deliberate depth changes, rising and sinking by just a few meters at a time. These movements were too controlled to be accidental and too precise to belong to civilian traffic, and this was not a vessel trying to avoid detection. Instead, it behaved like something testing how the Americans would react. Within minutes, analysts ruled out natural noise, drifting objects, or commercial shipping. According to former U.S. Navy officers interviewed by Naval News, modern submarines often probe enemy defenses by adjusting depth and speed to see which sensors respond and how quickly tracking data sharpens. This pattern matched that behavior almost perfectly. The contact was not hiding, it was watching. To remove any remaining doubt, the U.S. Strike Group authorized a brief, active sonar ping, a rare but controlled step. Active sonar is not used casually because it reveals one's position, yet in this case, the calculation was clear. The result came back instantly. The echo was solid, metallic, and unmistakable. It was a steel hull, large and dense, moving with confidence beneath the carrier. This confirmed that the contact was a military submarine, not an unknown anomaly. Once the signal was logged, acoustic specialists compared the sound profile with existing databases. According to reporting by Reuters, NATO navies maintain detailed libraries of submarine acoustic signatures built over decades of Cold War tracking and post-Cold War encounters. Within a short window, the data pointed toward a Russian nuclear-powered attack submarine, likely operating as part of Moscow's ongoing effort to monitor NATO naval movements. At this point, conventional logic would suggest a retreat. A submarine that has been detected usually dives deeper, increases distance, and fades away. That is how most encounters end, quietly and without headlines. But this time, something different happened. The submarine did not turn away. It did not increase speed. It did not vanish into deeper water. Instead, it held its position at a steady bearing relative to the carrier group. To U.S. commanders, this was the clearest signal yet that the encounter was intentional. According to former Pentagon officials speaking to Defense News, remaining close after detection is a recognized method of signaling presence without triggering open confrontation. The seriousness of the moment cannot be overstated. An aircraft carrier is one of the most valuable assets the United States possesses, carrying thousands of personnel and representing billions of dollars in military capability. A submarine operating within potential engagement range, even without weapons deployed, automatically elevates the risk level. It is not just a tactical issue, but a strategic message sent beneath the surface where cameras cannot follow. Yet the most striking detail was not the detection itself. It was the submarine's decision to stay. That refusal to retreat transformed the encounter from a technical exercise into a psychological contest. The Russian vessel was no longer just observing. It was challenging the system, waiting to see whether the world's most powerful navy would blink first. And that choice set the stage for what came next, because once the submarine revealed its intent, the U.S. Navy shifted from observation to control. If the submarine was no longer hiding, but also not attacking, then what exactly was it trying to say beneath the surface? The turning point came quietly, almost deceptively. After holding position beneath the carrier group, the Russian submarine did something rare and unmistakable. For a brief moment, it activated active sonar. In the dark silence of the ocean, that pulse was not an accident and not a technical slip. It was deliberate. To naval professionals, it carried a clear meaning. The submarine was no longer content with being detected. It wanted to be acknowledged. This was not an attack. No weapons were armed, no launch sequences initiated. Instead, the sonar burst functioned as a signal, a way of saying presence had been established and the message had been delivered. According to reporting by Naval News, submarines occasionally use short active sonar emissions during close encounters to announce themselves without escalating to combat, especially in politically sensitive waters. Inside the U.S. Carrier Strike Group, the reaction was not panic nor surprise. Training took over. There were no emergency alarms and no sudden course changes. Weapons remained cold. According to U.S. Navy operational doctrine discussed in Defense News, reacting aggressively to a non-kinetic signal risks turning a controlled encounter into a crisis. The goal in moments like this is dominance, through stability, not shock. Instead of responding with force, American commanders made a calculated choice. They kept the carrier on its original course. This detail mattered. An aircraft carrier altering direction under submarine pressure can be read as hesitation. By holding course, the U.S. Navy sent its own message, one that did not require sound or movement. Control was already assumed. At the same time, beneath the surface and beyond public view, the response shifted gears. The decision was not to confront the submarine directly, but to tighten control around it. Escort ships adjusted their spacing. Sensor coverage was refined. Every movement of the submarine was logged, compared, and analyzed. According to Reuters, modern naval encounters increasingly focus on collecting behavioral data rather than forcing disengagement, because long-term intelligence value often outweighs short-term tactical victory. The seriousness of this moment cannot be overstated. An active sonar signal from a foreign attack submarine operating near a U.S. carrier group carries political weight far beyond the immediate encounter. It tests restraint, rules of engagement, and the credibility of deterrence. During the Cold War, similar incidents often ended with near collisions or aggressive maneuvers. Today, the battlefield is quieter, but no less dangerous. What made this encounter stand out was the restraint on both sides, and particularly the American refusal to escalate. By not responding with sonar of its own or visible force, the U.S. Navy denied the submarine the reaction it may have been seeking. Instead of a duel, the situation became a slow tightening of the net, where time and data favored the surface force. Former U.S. naval analysts cited by the war zone have explained that the most effective response to a submarine challenge is often patience. A submarine that announces itself sacrifices secrecy, and secrecy is its greatest weapon. Once that advantage is gone, the balance quietly shifts. As the Russian vessel lingered beneath the strike group, the question was no longer whether it could threaten the carrier. The real question became how long it could remain before pressure mounted from every direction. The encounter had moved beyond signaling and into a contest of endurance and control. And that raised the next critical issue. If the United States chose not to fire, not to chase, and not to escalate, then how exactly would it seize the initiative beneath the sea? The shift from watching to controlling happened the moment the strike group chose to bring air power into an underwater problem. While the carrier kept moving with steady confidence, a flight deck crew prepared an MH-60R Seahawk for launch, because this helicopter is built for one job that matters most in moments like this: finding a submarine before it can choose the distance and the timing. The U.S. Naval Academy's own aviation overview describes the MH-60 Seahawk family as a platform that can deploy sonobuoys and extend a ship's ability to track undersea threats, which is exactly why it becomes the fleet's fast response tool when seconds and uncertainty start to pile up. The Seahawk lifted off and pushed out over the water, and then it started dropping sonobuoys one by one. Each buoy looked small from the air, but together they formed something much bigger than a line of sensors. They became a temporary listening grid, a net that could turn an ocean into a map of sound. The U.S. Navy has described sonobuoys as air-launched acoustic sensors designed to relay underwater sounds back to Navy aircraft, including platforms like the MH-60R, which is why the helicopter can build a tracking picture quickly without waiting for a ship to sail directly over the contact. Down below, the Russian submarine did what experienced crews always try first. It began maneuvering. It changed depth, then altered course, then tried again, aiming to slip through the gaps before the grid fully closed. However, the logic of a buoy field is harsh. Every move creates a new acoustic clue, and every clue becomes easier to compare once multiple sensors are listening at the same time. A sonobuoy can detect a submarine by listening for sounds, and some can also use an active ping to bounce sound off an underwater object, which helps narrow down a contact that is trying to hide in background noise. Above the waterline, nothing looked dramatic, and that was the point. The carrier did not swerve or speed up. Destroyers did not sprint forward in a loud chase. Instead, the strike group let the sensors do the work, because modern undersea tracking is less about one perfect detection and more about stacking small advantages until the target has no clean exit. The MH-60R is built around that idea, using dedicated anti-submarine sensors, including systems designed to search and classify contacts so the helicopter can tighten the picture and feed it back to the ships in real time. This is where the encounter becomes genuinely serious, even without weapons. A submarine's greatest protection is uncertainty, because if a carrier group cannot be sure where it is, then every movement becomes more dangerous and every decision becomes slower. A layered sensor net attacks that uncertainty directly. Once a submarine is held inside overlapping listening zones, it is forced into a bad trade. If it stays shallow, it risks being easier to track. If it goes deeper, it may run into different water conditions that still do not break the net. If it turns hard, it may generate more noise. If it slows down, it loses room to maneuver. The result is that evasion stops being a clever escape plan and starts looking like a series of shrinking options. And the most uncomfortable part, from the submarine's perspective, is what the US gains even if nothing else happens. The more the Russian boat moves, the more patterns it reveals. How it shifts depth, how it responds to pressure, how it times its turns, and how it manages noise while maneuvering. In other words, the strike group is not just preventing a surprise, it is collecting a behavioral fingerprint that can matter in a future crisis. That is the kind that changes the mood in an operations room. The submarine tried to become the hunter by forcing a shadowing duel. Yet once the Seahawks' sonobuoys stitched the water into a living grid, the Russian crew faced a trap made of information. The harder it worked to disappear, the clearer its operating style became. Once the submarine was fully mapped and every move was being heard, how long could it stay before pressure, not weapons, forced a decision? As the sensor picture sharpened, the balance of the encounter quietly shifted. The U.S. destroyers escorting the carrier began to tighten their arcs, adjusting position just enough to seal off the most important layers of water without advertising the move. From the surface, nothing looked aggressive. Below the surface, however, the geometry changed fast. The space where the Russian submarine could maneuver freely started to shrink, not because of a chase, but because coverage replaced uncertainty. For the submarine crew, this was the moment when initiative slipped away. Every turn, every depth change, and every pause was now tracked across multiple sensors. According to U.S. Navy analysts cited by Defense News, once a submarine is held inside overlapping detection zones, the fight is no longer about stealth, but about endurance and decision-making. The submarine may still move, but it no longer controls the terms of the encounter. The ocean stops being a shield and becomes a map. What followed was not violence, but pressure, psychological pressure, the kind that builds when a crew realizes it is being watched continuously, even if no alarm sound and no weapons are armed. There were no warning shots, no threatening maneuvers, and no escalation orders. Yet the message was unmistakable. The submarine was contained. Its movements were predictable. Its options were narrowing with every minute. This type of pressure has a long history in undersea warfare. During the Cold War, both US and Soviet submarines often broke contact suddenly once tracking became too tight, fearing collision or miscalculation. In modern encounters, the calculation is more complex. According to reporting by Reuters on recent NATO naval operations, intelligence collection now plays a central role in these standoffs. Allowing an opponent to maneuver under observation can reveal how a submarine behaves when stressed, how it manages noise, and how it chooses escape routes. That information can be more valuable than forcing a dramatic disengagement. Inside the Russian submarine, the situation had changed from challenge to reassessment. The original goal, to shadow and signal presence near a US carrier, had been achieved. Continuing further carried growing risk with diminishing return. The longer the submarine stayed, the more data it surrendered. Not just where it was, but how it reacted under sustained tracking. At that point, remaining close no longer demonstrated strength. It invited exposure. The withdrawal began subtly. There was no sudden acceleration and no sharp dive. Instead, the submarine eased away in a controlled manner, increasing distance slowly while maintaining discipline. This was not a retreat born of panic. It was a calculated decision to disengage without triggering misinterpretation. According to former U.S. naval officers interviewed by the War Zone, controlled withdrawal is often the safest way to end a close encounter, signaling intent to disengage while avoiding the risks that come with abrupt movement. The U.S. Navy did not break contact immediately. Tracking continued as the submarine backed off, ensuring that the departure was genuine and not a setup for a new maneuver. Throughout this phase, sensors remained active and data continued to flow. Acoustic signatures thinned with distance, but patterns were already logged. The encounter was effectively over, yet its value was still being harvested. Above the water, the carrier group maintained course and tempo, sending a final quiet signal of confidence. No reactionary turns, no visible disruption. The message was simple. Control had been maintained from start to finish, and that leaves the question that defines this entire episode. No missiles were fired, no hulls were damaged, no headlines screamed of crisis. Yet beneath the surface, one side tested boundaries and the other calmly absorbed, measured, and responded. In a confrontation where restraint replaced firepower and data replaced destruction, it becomes worth asking. In a clash without shots, who truly walked away with the advantage? When the encounter finally faded beneath the waves, one detail stood out above everything else. From the first sonar contact to the final withdrawal, the U.S. aircraft carrier never altered its course. That choice was not accidental. In naval operations, consistency under pressure is a message in itself. By holding steady while a foreign submarine tested the perimeter, the carrier strike group signaled control, confidence, and readiness without saying a word. The standoff ended without a single shot fired, yet it was far from meaningless. According to reporting by Reuters, modern naval confrontations increasingly revolve around intelligence collection rather than immediate confrontation because understanding how an opponent moves, reacts, and withdraws can shape future operations more than a brief show of force. In this case, the United States walked away with a detailed acoustic and behavioral record of a Russian attack submarine operating under pressure, something analysts describe as extremely rare and strategically valuable. The larger lesson is clear. In today's maritime environment, power is no longer defined only by who fires first, but by who can force the other side to disengage on unfavorable terms. The Russian submarine arrived to challenge and to signal presence. It left after realizing that every additional minute meant giving away more than it gained. That shift, from confidence to calculation, marked the true outcome of the encounter. From a U.S. perspective, this was not a dramatic victory, but a disciplined one. Technology, coordination, and restraint worked together to manage risk while quietly dominating the situation. As Naval News has noted, modern carrier groups are designed not just to survive threats, but to absorb them, study them, and reduce their impact over time. That brings us to the question that lingers beneath the surface. In a world where silent encounters happen more often than open battles, do these unseen confrontations make the seas safer? Or do they push rival powers closer to a miscalculation no one can afford? If you want to keep uncovering the military stories that rarely make the headlines, don't forget to subscribe to Military Power.